بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So we have in fact covered the Surah Fatiha chronologically in order of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which divides Fatiha into two parts, but amongst those two parts there is a subsection, which means that the first part, of course, is the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second part is the dua, but within this also there are two separate categories. So one is إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ, that we are attributing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what belongs to Him alone, which is hidayah. In reality, it's related to the next ayah, which is why we seek His help. Okay? But in the first part, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ, we are giving what we can do on our part, which is ubudiyya and servitude. So the servant of Allah is required to give some effort, but ultimately their efforts are in reality only created by and controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the fruits of those efforts, we have to always seek assistance from our Creator. Right? So our part is to make some effort. The part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you will, of course everything is in His control, but in other words, it is Allah's sole prerogative to bring the results and the fruits of our labor. Okay, so now we get into the last part, which deals with, as I mentioned before, another way of looking at the surah is that we can say the first part deals with basically Allah Jalla Jalaluhu and His attributes. The second part of the surah, whether we understand it or not, but it does infer to the idea of nubuwwah or prophethood, and why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends to mankind agents of His kalam, of His word and His speech. And they are always chosen from amongst ourselves, meaning human beings. And they will always be and always have been. Well, there's no be anymore, because we know Khatam al-Nabiyyin, Muhammad was the last sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but they always have been, put it that way, people. And we are never sent an angel. And an angel was never sent to us as to give us a divine message in the kalam of Allah. An angel may have been sent to the person who was responsible for delivering that message, but then angels were never sent to human beings as a whole. Of course, that is covered later on in the Quran as to the reasoning behind all that. Why not? Because this oftentimes was the argument of the people who opposed the prophets, that why you amongst all of us? You're so special that God talks to you as opposed to me. Why couldn't God just send us all angels? And the matter is over with. Because part of the reason is, of course, first of all, we cannot relate to malaika, and there is no way we can follow an angel, because an angel is not a physical being in the sense of having the needs that we do. It is, or we can say they are, physical because they're made of nur, and light, after all, is part of the physical universe. True? So we're not saying they're non-physical. Mujarrad is the word they use amongst the mutakallimun and the theologians and philosophers in Islamic history. They use the word mujarrad. You know tajreed, have you ever heard this word before? No? Tajreed means to literally strip everything away from something, to strip it down to the bare, okay? Take everything away, this is tajreed. So mujarrad is something in which everything has been stripped away. So they use that word to refer what we might call in English as something metaphysical, being completely and absolutely non-physical. So we don't say malaika are mujarrad in the sense that they are completely non-physical and metaphysical. We say they're made out of nur. So if that's the case, are they physical or non-physical or metaphysical? Physical. Okay. Because nur is what? Light. And light is physical. The difference, of course, as we know, is that light in its nature is much more flexible. can travel in much faster speeds than the solid objects that we deal with, like our bodies and everything we have here on Earth. So then you have a type of speed which we call the speed of light. So the malaika are physical, but their physical nature is very subtle. That's the whole point. Okay, very subtle. And that's why they don't require things like food, sleep, spouses, procreation, right? Because they don't even have a gender for that matter, which is again the Quran talks about that there's no gender when it comes to malaika. They don't procreate. If the only time you need a gender is when what? Something procreates, that's how it survives. All right. Without that, then what happens to malaika? They simply come in and out of existence. Just like light is what? You turn it on, you turn it off, so forth. It comes in and out. There's no need for it to kind of, recreate itself through the issue of what? Male and female or gender. So they don't have a gender. That's one thing that adds to it. So in other words, the component of our life, which is very physical, is not there with the malaika. So they don't have the need to eat, to sleep, or to procreate, so they would never understand this part of human nature. And that's all coming up in Surah Al-Baqarah. Okay, as we end Surah Al-Fatiha and we go into Surah Al-Baqarah, there's a few important themes that are mentioned in that surah. It is basically the help, if you will, of the commandments of the Quran. And this is why Umar anhu took about 10 years, almost a whole decade, just to memorize this one surah, Surah Al-Baqarah. Because in it there are detailed commandments which form, as I said, the hub of all the other commandments of the Sharia and the Quran. Baqarah also, Surah Al-Baqarah was revealed entirely in Medina, which is also important because the majority of the ayat and surah and chapters of the Quran that were revealed in Mecca really don't deal with any type of commandment, any type of detailed guidance on how we should live our life legally, if you will. And I'm using that term loosely. Because we have to remember, and this is important also when we study these things, is that in the beginning, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, a lot of these so-called commandments, or the legal part of Islam, it was very organic. It wasn't as structured as we may find ourselves living in Western society, especially where English common law and everything else revolves around in our legal system. It's very structured, right? Everything is down to the T, correct? Whereas in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it didn't work like that. They weren't so high. They didn't have like what you call here the Anglo-Saxon work ethic, right? Everything is quantifiable and predictable, and no, there was a very organic way that things happen, and as they happen in the community, commandments would be revealed. See what I'm saying? So as things and events occurred in the community, commandments would be revealed as guidance to that community on how they should behave. There wasn't even, if you want to call it a constitution, right? A formally written type of law. It was something that was more enacted by the Prophet first, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and by the people around him. And that's important to remember, because our deen is supposed to be that simple. And the first thing that is mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah, after we talk about the other theme, which is something we will touch on a little bit today, is basically, well, in essence, if you look in the first couple of ayat, you have the introduction, and then after that, the munafiqun are mentioned briefly. About 2 ayat, that's it. Okay. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَقُولُ آمَنَّا. Okay, there's only 2 ayat that mention the munafiqun. Then the believers are mentioning, 2 ayat mentioning the kuffar. Then about 1 ayat mentioning the mu'mineen. And then about 15 or so ayat, wallahu alam, if you're counting, that mention the munafiqun. And after that, the entire saga of Bani Israel begins. Ya Bani Israel uthkuru ni'mati allati an'amtu alaykum. So that begins the entire saga of Bani Israel. That's very important as well, because that's one part of the theme and what I'm getting to. So one part of the theme is Bani Israel. In fact, Surah Al-Baqarah, if you know the story of the cow, it all revolves around whom? Bani Israel, right? Now, after that, we see that in terms of, as I said, law and the community, the first thing that is mentioned are things that revolve around marriage. And out of all the things that are mentioned when it revolves around marriage, at-talaq marratan, divorce. Within all of that also, we have a brief mention of how to deal with other communities. And that is related too, because as we get to another surah very closely, soon afterwards, we see Surah An-Nisa. Again, there's two main themes in Surah An-Nisa. The surah itself is named after whom? Women. So marriage, and then after that, communal relations with other people, even to the point of international relations. How do we deal with people outside of our own community at any level? And those are very closely related. So you have the community inwardly first, in which the basis of that community in reality is marriage. Okay? That is the beginning. Well, obviously, because human beings don't begin except through what? Marriage. The beginning of Surah An-Nisa, what does it say? اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء. So the very beginning of all of humanity period is through what? Marriage. So the very beginning of any people, any community starts there, at that point. So marriage is the first thing that's spoken about. When that is spoken about, when the community internally has its affairs in order and it knows how to behave, then it can be taught how to behave with whom? Other people. So what is the lesson? The lesson is, and until and when we get our own home in order, and you cannot go about doing what? Trying to get somebody else's house in order. Right? So the first thing that is a priority in the community is this, is our own affairs. And our own affairs are predicated upon even the very basic unit of any society, which starts with a man and a woman. At the very basic level. From there, everything else comes into play. Hence, perhaps, maybe that's why, there's many reasons why, but the Prophet ﷺ once said, أَكْمَلُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِيمَانًا أَحْسَنُهُمْ خُلُقًا, that the most perfect of all the believers in their iman are those who are best in their character. And then he said what? وَخِيَارُهُمْ خِيَارُهُمْ لِنِسَائِهِمْ, and the best of them are those who are best to their women. Right? So it all starts there. If that is in order, then everything else will find its way. If that's not in order, then it'll be very difficult to set other things into motion, because basically you don't have your own house together. It's falling apart. You have no business fixing anybody else's house. So, but those topics are related, and that's why they start off that way as well. So we find that in Surah Al-Baqarah, the mention of this, of things that are revolving around marriage and revolving around divorce, both because as marriage is there, we have the unfortunate reality too that with it will come what? Separation and divorce. That is another both of these topics, unfortunately in our context, are kind of very, very, very misunderstood, and there's not enough knowledge in the community of these topics. So often itself marriage, what it is, what it stands for, and even divorce, right, which is of course like a very taboo subject for most Muslim cultures. And it's something that we don't even want to mention, and rightfully so. There is a hadith, albeit it is considered weak, that you've probably heard, أَبْغُضُ الْحَلَالِ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ الطَّلَاقُ, that the most despised of all things that are permissible with Allah is divorce. And although the hadith itself is considered to be weak, there are some ulama, primarily the Hanafi scholars, have used it as a principle of fiqh. What that means is that in essence they consider divorce to be something that in essence is not appreciable. However, it is permitted. But that doesn't mean, okay, that we go to the other extreme, which is what? We are not Catholics either. Okay, so in the Catholic religion, divorce under no circumstances is ever permitted, technically. Right? I mean, they do it still. right? That's the convenience of Christianity. Once you believe that Christ has died for all your sins, it basically doesn't matter if you break the rules. But a good Catholic is not given permission to do what? Divorce. So no matter how bad the marriage is, how bad the situation is, they're supposed to keep it going to the end. So we don't go that extreme either. That's also important to cover because we don't want to understand things, anything that we do, we want to understand it within the context of the Prophet ﷺ and the early community. Because again, these laws were revealed organically amongst them, in their midst, during their time, and often cases, as we will see in the Quran, in very personal situations, very particular situations, even to the Prophet himself, ﷺ. True or not? How many instances? We will cover all of it. There's so many instances where very personal and private parts of the Prophet's life, ﷺ, were the catalyst or the backdrop of revelation and guidance for the community. So again, very organic, very natural way of understanding law and how we deal with one another. And part of the things that did happen in that community, and it happened more than maybe we would like to admit, is divorce. Matter of fact, to be just very frankly speaking, historically, we find that even the best of the community, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, was a divorcee. Omar radiallahu anhu was also a what? A divorcee. There were many wives of the Prophet radiallahu anhunna who were divorcees. In fact, a good portion of them. So obviously, they didn't understand what a lot of Muslims now understand, is that it is completely and 100% unspoken of, unheard of, and not acceptable. So that's why the Quran does cover and speaks about, as I said in Surah Al-Baqarah, we'll see the beginning of it, at-talaqu marratan, right? The whole discussion of what is divorce, how do couples get separated, because it happened, it does happen, and it will happen in the future, but it's part of something that the community has to know how to deal with. How to deal with that. Right? Now marriage comes up in a different way. One of the things that's interesting is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deals with that subject, He tops it off in Surah Al-Baqarah with a statement, which is very simple, but is the premise of even what marriage, how we should understand it. And this is again coming back to that original community that we claim to follow and how they understood things and how their life was very organic. Even sometimes that's why it's necessary to study the habits of the Arab before Islam, to understand what's going on in their own minds and how they viewed certain things. Because Muslim communities and societies today are traditionally, mashallah, have been Muslim for a long time. And they may not understand the difference between a people who had no guidance, no religion, no Islam, and then were guided towards Islam, right? And what that means for us. So how we practice, it should be based on their practice. And so they were, one of the unique qualities of the Arab is that because they were almost trapped, especially the Arabs of the Prophet ﷺ, okay, meaning the Quraysh and other tribes in Hijaz, and trapped meaning that they did have, of course, contact with other people and civilizations, but nobody ruled them. Nobody actually had any power over them. So they were almost free to a certain extent. They had their own, obviously, taqaleed and habits and culture, but they weren't really influenced by these great civilizations. So they were almost free to do what? When that deen came to them, they were very eager and willing to give up those old practices and start anew. Whereas you see in civilized people, quote unquote, it's very difficult for them to give up their old habits. Very difficult for them to give up their culture because they feel, and this is even applies to people today, that thus far we are very wealthy, we are very powerful, the things that we do, it works. It's a very simple equation, right? We have money, we have power, we have everything we need, so why should we be told what to do? Because what we're doing, obviously what? It works. You understand? People normally don't want to change unless they feel that they have to. Right? So if you're fit and you're in shape and you don't have a stomach, then why worry about it? Why worry about dieting or anything else? I'm fine, I'm in good shape. But a person who something's wrong and something's off, then they're the ones who are going to reconsider that, right? Like, okay, maybe I should eat differently or get into shape, so forth. So it goes the same way even with these civilizations. A lot of them are habitually just assumption. They have presumptions that what we do must be right because what we see in front of us, we see good results. And in Surah Al-Kahf, you see the whole argument between the two people, and one of them who has the garden and the wealth, what does he say? Even if I die and I'm taken back to my Creator, then I will only find good. Based on what? The idea that right now I'm good, so why, if Allah is blessing me now, why won't He bless me there? See the presumption? Everything's going good now, so I must be in good favor with Allah. So even if I'm taken back to Allah, I'll also find good there. But that's not actually the case. Right? We cannot judge, and this is what Allah reminds us of. Right? وَبِالْآخِرَةِ هُمْ يُوقِنُونَ. The believers are certain of their meeting of Allah and the life of the hereafter. And the life of the hereafter cannot be judged according to the standards of what we find here. It cannot. So just because things are going good here, right, there's no way, and this goes back to even the premise that I had before of how we know things. There's no way any one of us simply knowing or using our experiences here in this earth that we would know definitively what's going to happen after death, is there? So is there somewhat of an audacity of a human being to assume that what I see here is what I'm going to see there? What's the answer? Absolutely. Complete audacity to assume. Again, it's what? It's an assumption. That what I see here is what's going to happen there. What I experience here, that's what's going to happen there. And because everything's going here, then I must, right? It's like saying, even if I'm taken back to Allah right now, I'm going to be fine. I'll be all right. And how many people talk like this that we may know? Right? Most people's assumption here, right, when you walk around, you talk to people, common, just anyone, even off the street, if you ask them about death and the hereafter, most of them will assume what? Oh, I don't have to worry about that. God loves me, I'll be fine. So, how can we be sure of that? How can you prove that? How can you say definitively that I'm be all right? Nobody really knows. It's a very presumptuous and very audacious claim that what? I know for sure what's going to happen. So a believer is never like that. Even if they are guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they still are scared, right? Mushfiqun, as the Quran says. Because they don't, and this is the interesting thing. Our aqidah is not that Allah is in any way oppressive or cruel. Right? So when we're mushfiqun, when we are worried about our akhirah, it's not the worry that Allah will be unjust. It is simply the honest admission of a human being that there is no way they can know for sure where they're going to be. You see the difference? One thing is to fear God from the point of view that, oh, God's going to just like some people may foolishly think that He's this big guy in the sky waiting to just take you out with a lightning bolt, right? At the slightest sin or anything you do wrong, just waiting to throw you into hell. Well, no. Anyone who believes and knows who Allah is in reality can never even think like that for even a split second. It's not like that. Or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unjust. Rather, Maliki Yawmiddin, He is the sole owner of the day of Qiyamah, meaning at the judgments that will occur, the judgment that will occur upon all human beings. Yawmi yaqumu an-nasu li rabbil alamin. The sole proprietor of that judgment is who? Allah. And that's a good thing. Because you don't want anyone else to be able to decide your fate. If there's anyone who is going to be merciful and understand everything and all the problems that you have, who is it? Right? So that's why Rasulullah said that Allah loves when you make excuses. Because nobody else, you know how sometimes you're in a predicament and you feel like people are judging you too harshly. If only people could understand what I'm going through. Right? All of us have been there in life. Something happens, people are being, you think like, oh man, everyone's got it wrong, everyone's judging me and they're being too harsh. So the beautiful thing about that is if you're in front of Allah, who knows better your own predicament and all the things involved in all your emotions and feelings and weaknesses? Nobody knows better. So that's why Rasulullah said that Allah loves what? Excuses. Because other people don't want to hear it, right? You messed up, you messed up. I don't care what your excuse is. But for Allah, who is very Arhamur Rahimin, the most merciful of all those who show mercy and understands completely all the things that you want to complain about and make an excuse, He loves to hear it. You see?
Well, it seems like Christians struggle a little bit with the concept of infinite mercy versus infinite justice.
Yes.
And the whole concept of original sin and how can God be infinite, both at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, alhamdulillah, actually, the whole Quran and all the hadith that we know, mercy is always the dominant sifa and attribute of Allah. Kataba ala nafsihi rahma. This is repeated more than once in the Quran, which basically means like the rule of thumb. Kataba ala nafsihi, Allah has written for himself. Meaning the rule of thumb with Allah in all things that he does is what? Rahmah. And remember, with Allah, it's not like he's obliged to do anything. So we shouldn't understand it like, Allah has to. But the rule of thumb is Allah always will have what? Rahmah. Justice is very rarely meted out to anyone. You understand? That's why, according to the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the Aqidah is that Allah, out of His fadl and rahmah, guides people and forgives people and does all these good things. If Allah so decides to punish someone, then that is His adl and that is His right to do so, and it was because it was just to do so. But majority of the time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He rules by what? The rule of thumb again is what? Kataba ala nafsihi rahmah. Or in another hadith Qudsi that explains that too, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, since the beginning of creation, there was a rule that was written, Inna rahmati tasbiqu or taglibu ghadabi. Different narrations, same meaning. That my mercy always will overcome my wrath. So we say that adl, in its context, right, it doesn't happen often. If it did, as Allah said, He would not leave a single creature living on earth. If there was justice, right, being done all the time, then the whole earth and everything in it should be done by now. So Allah's rahmah always overcomes His wrath, meaning the rule, like in everything in creation. وَاسِيَةُ رَحْمَتِي كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. So again, another ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, my mercy embraces everything in existence. Everything. So justice, how can the two beings have one and the same? Because that's perfection. Perfection, again, if it's all mercy, 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 and no justice, even as it just, human standards are not the same, obviously, but if we saw a person that was just so much mercy, right, bachara, always forgiving, always overlooking faults, but they never once stood up for themselves or anyone else, what would you say about such a person? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's bad. Okay, they're a pushover, basically. Nobody appreciates that. Okay, now of course, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى, Allah is much higher and greater than that, but the point is we use creation to kind of draw certain conclusions, and the conclusion is perfection in any being is not in all mercy. There has to be somewhat of the ability to do what? To be upset, if you will, right? To have wrath. If you didn't have any, this is part of the science of tazkiyah, which deals more with us as humans, but if a person, again, as I mentioned, is just all mercy and no anger, we would not consider that person to be a good charactered person. We would consider them to be deficient in their character, even if they're not violent. That's another issue in itself, but even if they're not violent, okay? For instance, would you ever speak out against wrong if you weren't angry? You know how some people say it's all good? And if you don't care and it's just, then you don't say anything. When will you speak out and talk about something is when you feel anger. So without some anger in your heart and in your life, you'll become basically what? A nobody. Nothing upsets you. Not even when other people, okay, it's one thing you personally don't like to take revenge for the wrong done to you. That's great. You're closer to the Prophet ﷺ. But what happens to other people doesn't even upset you? You understand my point? Like if other people are being treated unjustly or if other people are being abused, you won't say anything, you won't speak out. That is a deficiency of anger. And nobody would appreciate such a quality. Am I right or am I wrong? So there is a necessity of any being that we want to say that they are perfect, especially with Allah Azza wa Jal. Perfection demands, it goes back to the quality of qudra. Inna Allah ala kulli shay'in qadir. Just look at the statement. Indeed, Allah is able to do all things. So all things includes what? Forgiveness and punishment. If you're saying that one being can only forgive, you are limiting that being. Are you not? You're saying they can't. Look at the key word. They can't punish. No. So how could they be God? God should be able to do what? يَفْعَلُ مَا يُرِيدُ, whatever they want. So that, again, it goes back to another point of Aqidah that, the theologians say that Allah is not obliged to do anything, which means that if Allah so wanted, He could send everyone to Jannah and no one could question Him. But also the opposite, if Allah so wanted, He could send everyone to hell and no one could question Him. No one can say why, or why did you do this? Well, you're His property. لِلَّهِ مَا مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And the definition of true power and qudra, inna Allah ala kulli shayin qadir, again, by definition. When we're talking about rational conclusions and logic, we have to look at the words themselves, right? That's what logic does. The language you're using and the conclusions you're drawing. So when I say there's a being who has absolute power to do whatever, by definition that means it includes both forgiveness and punishment. If I say no, this is now what? This is very specific to only forgiveness and only mercy, then I have limited that being and I can no longer claim by definition that that being is all powerful. Do you understand the point? So how do we live with that? That's where the believer comes in. The believer is mushfiqun with the idea of what? Not that Allah is vengeful or needs to punish, but Allah can. And we have no access to the knowledge of what our fate will be. That is what we would be worried about, if you will. Not the fact that Allah is forgiving and will forgive or is merciful, because these other ayat and these hadith that I mentioned give us the hope that although Allah can do anything, what has He set as a standard? Mercy. So then there's another hadith of the Prophet ﷺ said that if the non-Muslims, if non-believers knew of the mercy of Allah, none of them would despair of Jannah. And if the believers knew of the justice of Allah, no believer would ever be safe or feel safe from hell. You see how he's, right? If a non-believer knew of the mercy of Allah, then they would all think they're going to Jannah. And if a believer knew of the justice of Allah, then all of them would assume they're what? We're all doomed to hell. None of us will ever get out. Because even the slightest infraction, if Allah so wills, right? Again, He can do whatever He wants. That's the definition of our Creator. Does whatever they want. Now, if that's the case, could not Allah, with the slightest infraction, punish someone and to be just in that? Now, one time you did something, your whole life you were good, and that one time you did something you weren't supposed to do, and He said, well, you still did something you weren't supposed to do, so what does justice demand? My whole life I was a good citizen, never disobeyed, never did anything wrong. While the judge has the prerogative either to be nice to you or to say what? No, we're going to set a standard. And that anyone who breaks a crime will have to be punished. So that's why we believe, and a very essential part of our Aqidah, is that again, Allah is not obliged to do anything. If He so wills, He can forgive a sinful person. And if He so wills, He can punish an obedient person for the slightest infraction. But the mercy part is what we rely on because this is what Allah has promised. So that's an important thing. We also believe Allah's promise, لا تخلف الميعاد, right? لا يخلف الميعاد. Many different ayat, many different statements of the Prophet ﷺ. Allah will not go back on His promise. That doesn't mean Allah is obliged. What I mentioned before, Allah can do what He wants, but the reason why He made certain promises is because they will be fulfilled. Not because He has to, but because He wants to. You understand? That is His irada, that He will fulfill these pledges. Part of these pledges is, again, there will be certain people that will be forgiven. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرِكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. It said, Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, this ayah means what? Indeed, Allah will never forgive that any partner is associated with Him, but anything less than that, Allah will forgive to whomever He wants. So in other words, anything short of shirk, no matter what the sin is, the literal meaning of the ayah is that no matter what that sin is, if Allah so wills to forgive someone, then He will forgive them. Clear statement, right? Inna Allah yaghfiru dhunuba jami'a. Another, there's many ayat, of course, but indeed Allah forgives all sins. And in the Arabic, yani ad-dhunuba jami'a, it literally means any type of sin, no matter how grievous or how bad it is, Allah indeed will forgive it. Okay? So based on the ayat I mentioned before, it said when Muawiyah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he was on his way out of this world, it said he made a dua where he said, Allahumma innaka kunta fi kitabika al-mubin, or fi kitabik. Yani, you have said in your book, this ayah, that indeed anything other than shirk, Allah will forgive for whomever He wills to forgive. So he said, Allahumma faj'alni fi man tasha'u an taghfira lahu. So, oh Allah, make me amongst those whom you will to forgive. Right? That's when you know Allah and His names and attributes. Okay, you understand this. He said, I'm not looking to be forgiven because I'm good or I've been perfect. I'm looking to be forgiven because you've said yourself, and your statements are true, that as long as I didn't commit shirk, you will forgive whoever you like for anything less than that. So make me amongst those whom you will to forgive. So what they don't appreciate is the perfect attributes of the Creator. So again, it goes back to Imam al-Maturidi. Remember I said that Imam al-Maturidi rahimahullah ta'ala proved the existence of God through evil. Understand? The fact that He does create evil is a sign of His existence. Because nothing or no one will oblige Him to do what's always right. If we had some say in the affair, if we had some control over the affairs of ourselves and the world around us, obviously the world would be different. So the fact that He brings hardships and evil is a sign of His absolute authority and autonomy and power. And that's something that unfortunately, it scares many humans. And it should. Right? It should, because that's where we as believers shouldn't feel safe. We rely on the mercy of Allah, but we should never feel safe completely, because we know Allah ultimately is not obliged to do anything. He's not obliged to do anything. He does what He wants. Right? And that takes a certain amount of maturity to accept. Otherwise, you want to believe God is what you want Him to be. That's exactly, unfortunately, what happens in that particular religion. God does what you think they should. And again, the question would be, from a logical point of view, if God does what I want, who's God? You understand the question? If God does what I want, then who's God? Like, everything I assume should be done, everything I assume should happen, that's what's going to. So that's why sometimes Allah too, to teach us a lesson, will do the opposite of what we ask for or what we want. Just to teach us who is God. It's not you. It's not your nafs. You may have wanted one thing, or again, this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Baqarah tells us what? I will test you, be shay'in, with certain things, like what? Loss of wealth, health, right? The fruits of our efforts. Why does Allah do that? Because He has to know. He's just trying to teach us a lesson, which is what? You're not in control. Be humble. So even the loss of your efforts is even sometimes more than health and wealth. Sometimes you can't control that. But loss of effort means what? You put your heart, your mind, and soul into something, expecting a certain result, and then Allah does the opposite. Why does Allah do that to you? Just to show you, you're not in control. Humble yourself. Don't worry, there will come a time for the believers, alhamdulillah. There will come a time when everything you want will be there for you. وَلَكُمْ فِيهَا مَا تَشْتَهِي أَنفُسُكُمْ. That's what the akhirah is all about. Now you get whatever you like. However you want it, whenever you want it, no questions asked. You're at free reign now to be as inventive as you want to be, mashallah. But before that, what Allah wants is that submission and humility. All right, and that's the whole lesson here. And that takes a maturity to acquiesce this, that Allah is Allah, and we are His abd, we are His what? His banda, His servant. And the nature of a banda and a servant is not to pretend like God has to do what we want them to do, but that no, God does what they want. Does it make sense? All right, so
one question regarding shirk, like sometimes you see, I mean, people can do obvious shirk, like literally, but sometimes one can indulge in shirk without even knowing it. I mean, is there a kind of differentiation between them?
Sure. Just the hadith is very clear.
Like when you even don't know you have done something which can be categorized as shirk.
Right. So that's what's called in the hadith as the shirk al-khafi, hidden shirk, which in essence is doing things for anyone or anything other than Allah. When our motives are not the pleasure of Allah, but it's something else or somebody else. That's what it means in essence. So it's not outward shirk. It's not a shirk in the sense that you're actually given Allah or given someone other than Allah an attribute of Allah or made him equal to Allah. Right? فَلَا تَجْعَلُوا لِلَّهِ أَنْدَادًا, as the Quran says. Right? You haven't made anyone equivalent to Allah, but outwardly, but inwardly, subtly, you have made someone equivalent to Allah by doing what? Doing something that's meant for Allah for the sake of somebody else.
So can they fall under the same category that?
Alhamdulillah, luckily enough, we are forgiven in the sense that we don't have to be amongst the mushrikun. We're still believers. You understand? So in the sense of that we are completely outside of the fold of Iman, no. But that action will not be accepted by Allah. But that's still a mercy. It would be, again, Allah's prerogative, and even then he wanted to say, well, you didn't really believe in me. Look what you did here. You did it not for me, you did it for somebody else. But that's not the case, because Iman was still there. You still believed in Allah. You didn't deliberately associate that partner with Allah. It happened kind of inadvertently, if you will. Just crept into your heart for a second. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man yusalli yura'i faqad ashraka." Whoever prays so that it can be seen by other people has indeed associated a partner with Allah. If you're praying for somebody else, it means your prayer is not for the sake of Allah, it's for that individual or that person or wherever it may be. And so that is a shirk in that sense. Something that should belong to Allah, now you're giving it to somebody else. And normally it's because deep down in your mind, you have, maybe not, again, consciously, but subconsciously, you have made that person or whoever it is that you're praying for kind of like, what should be for Allah is for them. So, for instance, if I pray and I look naked and pious, then this person will appreciate me and maybe I'll get some favors. So what's the problem? Who's the one who does in'am?
So it doesn't have to be a person, it can be like you're doing something for your own personal glory, that would be?
Yeah, that's included also, but that's at a much deeper level. So, like I say all the time, there's darajat, right? There's levels to all of this. So at a much deeper level too, there are people historically who have existed in the ummah who would consider even doing something for yourself as a type of shirk. That ubudiyya to Allah, that's where you get some of the aqwal of some of the shuyukh, some of the statements of the shuyukh, which sometimes, if not understood correctly, confuses a lot of people. Where you may have heard some people have said historically that I neither worship Allah because I want Jannah nor fear Jahannam. Okay, you understand what they're saying is that my worship of Allah is not that self-centered. Huh? I neither worship my Creator because I want Jannah or I fear Jahannam. That doesn't mean that they don't want to go to Jannah or they don't want to avoid the hellfire, but it means that my worship of Allah is not that self-centered, that I'm only thinking about what I get out of it. It's much deeper than that. That's, if we get to there, mashallah, that's a very special place to be. But we have to work on the basics first. I mean, you would also be very presumptuous for us to think that we're at that level, because that takes a lot of work to become a person like that, where I'm no longer just there because I'm afraid of going to hell or something bad happening to me. I'm there because Allah deserves to be worshipped and I'm the abd, that's it. And I'm not that self-serving. Even in personal relationships, that should also show in our character, and that's a very high level of character as well. Right? يُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ, preferring others above yourself, even though you may not be able to take care of your own needs. In other words, that a person gets to the level where they no longer think about what people can do for them, but they think about what they can do for others. It's not so self-serving all the time. That if I'm not getting, I won't put in the work. Rather, it's more the pleasure of giving that makes that person. And again, these are levels. That's why the Sahaba had said about them that what they gave for Allah was more beloved to them than what they received from Allah. The things that they were able to give up for the sake of Allah were more beloved to them than the things they received from Allah as gifts. So the power and wealth that followed, when the spread of Islam came, that to them was not as precious as being able to do what? Sacrifice for the sake of Allah. So Mu'adh bin Jabal radiallahu anhu died of the plague. Now, don't try this at home, but this is just to give you an example. It's said that when he was dying of the plague, he said, Ya Allah, you know I love you, so hit me with your best shot, so to speak. Like, give me what you will, the plague, whatever. I love it. Like, that's like a subhanallah, you know, like that. That's a very advanced level of love, where even, you know, the hardship that you go through, right, for your beloved is something that you cherish. The hardship that you go for, and this is like subhanallah. How great would it be to see the revival of these characteristics in the ummah again, right? And not being self-serving, but rather just being mashallah. People of sacrifice, and to love to sacrifice, and to love Allah at that level. And that love also obviously spills over into all these other things that we talked about, or the social construct of the Muslim community, and even to other people, right? And this is part of what we will get into, because obviously there's a distinction between us and others, and there is even in the ayah, Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, there's an admission that there is a Sirat al-Mustaqim. Do you understand what I'm saying? That there's a right path. Now, if you're saying there's a right path, also, by extension, you're saying that there's a right and a wrong. There's truth and falsehood. That's important because in our postmodern construct, all this, right, relativism, where everyone wants to assume that we can just all be right and it's all good and all that, and everyone has their own personal way, and there's no real truth to be found. Well, in the very statement, Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, what are you saying? There is a right path, because hidayah, from where ihdi comes from, the form, hidayah means to be guided. Irshad literally means if you come to a path that splits into two ways. Irshad means that you have to now choose which path to go down. So someone has to tell you which way both paths go. So if you're trying to go to Baghdad and you're traveling a certain route and the route splits into two directions, or anywhere, even on the highway, basically irshad means what? The GPS tells you to go this way. That's going to take you where you need to go. So you can't go both ways. You have to narrow it down. Is either I go this direction or go the other direction, which will take me the other way. So based on that, you're already saying that there is a right way to go and there's a wrong way to go. You get my point? As far as a lot of these ideologies that exist in our time, like I said, they would classify this now as the postmodern era, right? We're no longer in the modern era and the postmodern era. So a lot of this, mashallah, even in the past, our ulama have already discussed these ideas. There was an old philosophical tradition called sophistry, which is interesting because you know the word sophisticated comes from that. And sophistry, as they said in Arabic, is, well, let's just put it this way. They were a group of Greek philosophers who, in essence, believed there was no reality to anything. Okay? There's no reality, which in turn meant, of course, there's no morality either. You can't say this is right and this is wrong, because it's all just relative. It's basically the same thing, just thousands of years ago. Right? Oh, you can't say right, wrong. You can't say that this is good, this is bad. Everything is, there's no reality to anything, so why even care? Right? Ethics, morality, what does it mean? Huh? So the ulama responded to them in a very ingenious way, simple but ingenious, which is simple. Okay? You just ask a person like that, oh man, why you guys always argue all these religions? You know, you guys are always arguing and nobody can agree. Why can't everyone just be right? Okay, so a simple question. So if I say there is a right and wrong, am I right or wrong? Just ask that question. So what happens? If they say, yes, you're wrong, you're so judgmental. So you've just proven there's a wrong. You understand? If you tell me that, yeah, you're wrong, you shouldn't be that judgmental, then what have you done? You've proven there's a wrong, right? And if you say, no, there's no right and wrong, then I don't have to accept your argument, because that means that there's nothing right or wrong about what you say either. So either way you look at it, no matter what answer they give to you, right, you don't have to accept their argument. If they say I'm wrong, then they've already acquiesced to the fact that, yes, okay, now there's a what? There's a right and there's a wrong. And if they say, no, there's no right or wrong, so then I don't have to follow your opinion either, because there's no what? There's no right or wrong. So why should I follow your opinion? If it's all just relative, I don't need to follow you either. Because this is why you're arguing with me, right? Is because you want me to accept your opinion and follow it. But you see, either, in other words, the response, either one that they give, they have already proven that their madhab, that their opinion is what? Batil. Okay, it has no basis. So we go further. So once we understand that and we say, okay, there must be a right and wrong, then how do we understand what is right and wrong? That's the key, right? On what premise do we understand now what is right and what is wrong? Maybe one day, inshallah, maybe, I don't know, I thought about making it the topic of the khutbah. But in essence, nubuwwah is how we understand right and wrong. This is why we're asked to be shown what? Sirat al-Mustaqim. And then that path is described to us. It's not just left to us as something that we have to figure out for ourselves, but it is described as that path that was already traveled by whom? An'amta alayhim, right? Those people whom you are blessed, which primarily refers to the prophets. Now, the basis of that goes back to, I think we did discuss this earlier, like our epistemology, and very briefly, how do human beings know things? Either we know them empirically through our senses, or we know them logically, we rationalize, we come to conclusions, or we know them through khabar, meaning that we are told, right? And the reality is, even according to Western philosophers and intellectual thinkers and everything else, the majority of what human beings know, we know through khabar. Even in the empirical sciences, okay, there are many things that either, whether we are doctors or scientists or whatever profession we have, there's a lot of things that we have not actually discovered ourselves, but we were simply just taught, and they work, right or wrong. You didn't do the bother of going back and doing all these same experiments and going through all the things that the people came before you to go through to come at these conclusions. You just simply read them later on in a textbook. Is that true or not? And there's nothing embarrassing about that, meaning what they're saying is, in reality, the majority of what we know as humans is what we are given by others. Is it correct or not? The majority. There's a few of us that may go out on a limb and really try to discover things and come up with these discoveries, but majority of humans, no matter what category we are, what knowledge we have, our knowledge is based on the previous discoveries of other people, and we were simply informed of them. Okay? Now the premise of all khabar, no matter what civilization, and this includes in Western civilization, the premise of any morality or ethics in any civilization and any people, the premise of all khabar, all right, is what? Any guesses? None? In order for us to accept and trust anything that someone told us, what is the most essential key to that?
Source.
The source. In what way, though? There is one way that is no doubt just about the, like as the muhaddithun explained, just from just simply put the number of narrations, right? Okay? Which I believe, I don't know which one of the empiricist philosophers in the Western culture, in the Western tradition, I believe it was Hume's, or one of them said that, certain reports of a blackout that happened hundreds of years ago, the only reason why he accepted it is because so many cultures, so many different people from different places narrated it, that even though it may seem to be phenomenal, but it must have happened because this many people can't what? Can't lie. And that we believe that too in Islam. The whole idea that the Quran is acceptable because it came to us from tawatur. The same principle. So many people have narrated this event, or in this case have narrated what the Prophet ﷺ taught them, that we are sure of its what? Veracity, right? That it's true. So that's one, you're right. One is just simply the source. But part of that is also very key ingredient. I'm just trying to get you to, this is like the essence of what a believer should be, and this is why I wanted to make it a topic of khutbah, because it's kind of sad to see that this is the opposite of what we do.
Witnesses.
That's part of the number of people, or how many people saw the event or heard it or whatever it may be. None. Sidq, amana, trustworthiness, honesty. No, is it not? The premise of any report being acceptable outside of just sheer number, right, is what? The honesty and integrity of the person telling you. Because if you cannot trust the person telling you the things that you're being told, then what does that mean? Will you accept any of it? No. So the integral part of khabar is amana. And that's why this was a necessary quality of every prophet. Without this quality, the whole idea that we are being told what is right and wrong, it goes out what? It goes out the window. It's no longer applicable because there's no amana. You can't trust the person. You can't rely on the person. Why is that so important? Well, you do the guesswork, all right? If there's no amana, including for ourselves as an ummah, if we cannot be people who are trusted or can be trusted, or we cannot be honest and integral people, then why should anyone listen to what we say? Say what you want, but at the end of the day, if they see in you something else, that you're not again people of integrity and honesty, it doesn't really matter what you say at that point in time. And even to the point that when a dishonest person becomes honest, you know the whole story of the boy who cried wolf? What's the moral of the story? Because he was fibbing and lying so much, he was so habitual in lying that even when he was telling the truth, no one was willing to. No one was willing to listen. So it is necessary for any group or any person that if your testimony even, or anything you say is to be relied upon, then it is absolutely imperative that that person has amana, that they can be trusted. And of course, this is the one quality out of all the qualities that the Prophet ﷺ was known for, and he was known for many, okay? But the one that stood out amongst all of them was what? Al-Amin. Al-Amin is not just Amin. Al-Amin, meaning the most trustworthy person amongst us. And even logic would conclude that why would a man go through such things, already being known for their honesty, would risk being ostracized, even killed, losing everything, including the money that he used to make. He was successful in business, losing everything for a lie. People can make up a lie to benefit, right? So I can make up a lie if I'm building a mega church, or I'm an online preacher who makes literally millions and billions of dollars. It's very easy to lie then. I'm getting pretty much so everyone can see it. And it's amazing to me how people go for all that stuff. In the 80s, I was very big too. You know what I'm referring to, right? I mean, literally millionaires. Mansions, gold. And then they have the audacity to tell the people, this is what God wants. God loved. One guy actually told his congregation that God told me last night I have to have my own private jet. And they all said, okay, wonderful. Let's get this man his own private jet. So the Prophet ﷺ, did he get any of that? Even when he passed away, after victory was attained and Islam spread, what did he have when he left this world? Did he still face hardships even after all the victories and everything was supposedly going good? Even for his followers, Abu Bakr, Umar was stabbed and killed and assassinated in his capital, right? Uthman in his own home. Ali was poisoned. If you look at it from a worldly perspective, what logical conclusion will you make? It's like, wow, it doesn't make any sense for these people to be doing all this when this was the result. It's not like everything was going good for them. They went through hardships. So why did they go through these hardships?
And it's not that the Prophet wasn't offered that.
Exactly. This is the beauty of it. He was offered all of this. That's when logically you will conclude what? People can lie, but people cannot make up a lie for something of that type of moral excellence, because there's no immediate benefit that you can associate to them. So what do they get out of all of this? So the only conclusion can be what?
Truth.
They were telling the truth. Right? That they were telling the truth. Simple example of that too is like, again, you can't just deny things based on the fact that a thinking person will not use simply empirical knowledge to deny a testimony. This is a simple example, but I just read this recently in a book where it's an old book. That's why they use the word Siam, Siam, like Thailand. And but anyhow, so the British guy comes to Thailand to explain to the king there that in Britain it gets so cold that at times the water freezes, and when it's frozen, it's so solid that you can ride your elephant over it, and it won't break. So the king in Thailand said, "I used to think you were intelligent, but now I know you're a fool." Why? Because in Thailand there's no snow, there's no frozen water, so he doesn't understand. He's never experienced it before, so he said water turning solid and becoming so solid it's like a rock and you can ride an elephant over it. You're an idiot. So he drew his conclusion that his testimony must be false because he's never what? He's never seen it before. But if he just used a little bit of reflection, he could understand that can water become solid? Yeah, just because you've never observed it before doesn't mean that it's not what? It's not true. So the same argument is given in the Quran again and again for the Quraysh when they would deny the resurrection. Right? Just because you didn't see it, you're assuming automatically that it's not going to happen. Well, let me make you think about this a little deeper. So we talked about that ayah in Surah Yasin when he said, who would revive this dust? وَهِيَ رَمِيمٌ. When it's all just dust, and who's going to bring this back to life? قُلْ يُحْيِي الَّذِي. Who will revive it? The one who created أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ, from the very first time. In other words, use your sense. The one who created something from nothing can create something from something? So you're not even being logical in your conclusion. You're simply denying it on what? Well, I haven't seen it yet. So what? There's many things that we've never observed, but we know, right? They've happened, or they will happen, or can happen. And that's the entirety of the Quran. The mukhbir, the one telling you, is honest. We have all the proof in the world, right? And what they're telling you too is not irrational. Not at all, by any means of the word. Okay? You just haven't been there yet. But don't worry. As the Quran, your time will come, right? You'll get there. And then when that time comes, you would have wished you've listened to that prophet. That what they told you was absolutely 100% fact. And now you're coming to see it. Right? Just in the same way, simple example again, but it works. If you were in the womb of your mother and you had the ability to actually hear, well, you do actually have the ability to hear in those things, but let's say you had the ability to rationalize, and someone came to you, something was sent to you, a message or whatever it is to tell you in the womb, you're about to get into the dunya and you don't know what you're going to see. You're in the womb, there's no light, there's nothing. And then you said, yeah, you're going to come into the dunya and the way it's described? Whoa, what are you talking about? Sunlight and mountains and streams and rivers and forests and, all these beautiful oceans that are even more than the land itself and are more abundant than the land itself. And I go, what would a person say if they could say so at that time in the womb and they don't see it? Are you out of your mind? Right? Well, how? What are you talking about? Mountains and rivers and oceans and land and this and that? It's just made up fairy tale stuff. And then all of a sudden they come into dunya. Bam! Oh. This is what it is. That's why Ali radiallahu anhu said that people are asleep until they die. Right? People are asleep until they die. So it's just like being in that state. You shouldn't be woefully ignorant of it. Like, oh, just because I'm not there yet doesn't mean it's just like that. You were in the womb, nothing was going on, and all of a sudden, bam, you're in the dunya. Now you're going through another travel or another period, and that is called the dunya. And the dunya is, in essence, what? Mazrat al-akhirah. It is your literally planting field, your garden, if you will. And when you're done planting, then you will see its results, and that is the akhirah. All right, subhanAllah, I actually didn't cover half of the things that I had intention to cover, but okay, we did something. So here we are at Ihdina Siratal Mustaqim. We can start Surah Al-Baqarah next time. Like I said, one thing to remember as an important point of when I mentioned Bani Israel, why are they being spoken about predominantly in Surah Al-Baqarah? Well, one thing obviously is some people will say it's because they're the first community that we actually lived amongst. Okay, so when the Prophet made hijrah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there weren't any Christians. except for Salman al-Farsi. There weren't any Christians in Medina, but there were what? Jews, right? Also, they are related to the Arabs, right? Ibrahim alayhi salam was the forefather of both, and they are both Semitic languages, so there's a commonality there also. But there is a few hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, there's a hadith that's mentioned in the Musnad of Imam al-Bazar, where the Prophet ﷺ said, "Antum ashbuhul ummami bi bani Israel, samtan wa simatan wa hadyan," which basically means that you are the closest of all other nations in semblance to the children of Israel, inwardly, outwardly, and the things you do. What did the Prophet say? So I said that you are the closest of all people to Bani Israel, inwardly, outwardly, and in the things you do. So why does Allah mention all of these things? In another hadith that's in Bukhari and Muslim, as the Prophet ﷺ said, لَتَتَّبِعُنَّ سُنَنَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ, that you will follow the ways of those people who came before you. Shibran bi shibrin, dhira'an bi dhira'an, like inch by inch, yard by yard. If I'm translating it roughly, I mean it's not exact inch or yard, but in other words, what? In every little thing, حَتَّى لَوْ دَخَلُوا فِي حُجْرِ ضَبٍ, to the point that if they entered a lizard's hole, then what? لَتَّبَعْتُمُوهُمْ, then you would follow them there. So literally everything they do, look at what these hadith are saying. Who are the close? If you want to look at someone and see yourself, he's basically saying, look at Bani Israel. And then he's saying that all the things they did, you will do the exact same thing. So why does Allah mention them? It's not so much for us to look at it and say, oh, look at these people. You know how to tell a lot of, laugh at somebody, or look at what they did, look at how bad they were. No. It's the exact opposite. Why is Allah mentioning these things? Because you, by default, will do the same things. You will behave the same way. You will make the same mistakes. And the scary thing about that is when you understand that we will be like them and we will make the same mistakes, it also means that you will have the same results. Okay? وَلَن تَجِدَ لِسُنَّةِ اللَّهِ تَبْدِيلًا. And you will not find the sunnah of Allah that's mentioned a few times in the Quran, what this ayah that I just mentioned, is always in reference to something that goes on in every place, in every part of history, and with every people. That, for instance, a prophet comes, he preaches the message, the people reject him, those people are destroyed, right? So what does Allah say about this? You'll never find any change. It's like saying, again, I like simple examples because that's the best way to put things. You have a game, cricket, basketball, baseball, football, soccer, whatever sport you like, it doesn't matter. There are certain rules to the game, right? Do the rules of the game change because you're playing at home? Do they change it for you just because you're at home now, we want you to win, so we're going to change a few things? No, the rules of the game, no matter where you are, where you play, are what? Always the same. This is like what Allah is telling us, basically. The rules that I've set down for these things are always the same. People behave this way, they go down this path, the result, always the same. And no matter who these people are, where they are, what generation they are, you will not find it any different. وَلَن تَجِدُوا, meaning you'll never find any difference in this equation. Okay? So if that's the case, then we need to reflect when we read Surah Al-Baqarah, which is what? Why are these things being mentioned? So that you can, the best way sometimes parenting also includes what? When you take your child and you show them the example of someone who messed up their life. And what do you tell them? Yeah. See right there? You don't want to do that. You understand? You don't want to be like that. That's the best way of parenting, because why? It's a practical example. When you make those choices, you'll be like that person. We're not making fun of the person. We're just saying that they made the wrong choices in life. And when you make the wrong choices in life, that is the result. Don't think you're any more special than that person. So if you make those same choices, you will also what? End up in the same place. So this is what the Quran is telling us. If you follow this path, which the Prophet said some of us will, The good news is that the Prophet divided our ummah into two parts in regards to this. There are some people in the ummah, لا تزالوا في أمتي طائفة. There will always be a group of this ummah who will follow the path of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Always. But then the rest of them, unfortunately, they will do the opposite, which is what these hadith means, or that other hadith I mentioned means, is that what you will follow these guys. Copycats. Ittiba' literally means what? Copycats. And the ulama say copycat in terms of the sins and the mistakes that they make, right? The things that they do, you will do the same. One of my teachers said, kind of amusingly, but he said, we become such copycats now that we're not even original in the sin that we commit. In the past, the Muslim ummah, at least when they sinned, at least they were original. When the Crusaders first came to the Middle East, and they were very surprised with the entertainment they found. This is true. It's written in history. It's like, wow, we didn't have this kind of sophisticated entertainment back in Europe. It was pretty bare minimum, drink beer and do whatever, right? These guys are very sophisticated in their taste, mashallah, right? So they enjoyed themselves greatly. So, wow, we never seen this kind of cleaned up sin, right? With rose perfume and everything else going on. So this is wonderful. At least the ummah had some originality. The ummah has gotten to the point where they don't even have originality in what? They don't even have originality in sin. When they want to party or do something bad, they just follow the other person, right? There's no originality yet. They just follow everybody else, just as the Prophet said. This is exactly what the hadith means according to those, that what they do in terms of ma'asiyah and disobedience, you do the same thing. You become copycats, right? No originality left. Just do whatever they do, right? And then what is the result, though? Of course, what we have to be reminded is that if you follow that path, the unfortunate thing is the same things that happen to them, right? Which is the lesson you should learn in the Quran and in history, will happen to you. It is the same path, it is the same results, right? But if you follow the path of the Sunnah, then you will get those results. And those results are always fruitful. There's hardship in it, no doubt, following the path of the Prophet ﷺ. You have to be of the highest moral standard, which is what we mentioned earlier, is amana, to be honest, to be trustworthy, to be reliable people. It's not going to be popular. You're not going to get all the support in the world in the beginning, but the ultimate result, as the hadith of Tirmidhi says, about those people who follow the path of the Sunnah, when everyone else is going that way, is that what? Those people who want to hurt them will never be able to hurt them. You understand? Those people who try to disparage them and hurt them will never be able to hurt them. Right? They will be able to continue on that path unabated, meaning Allah will help them. Ihdina siratal mustaqim, keep them on that path. This will be related later. This will be my last point, that we can have a few questions before we leave. The wise marriage mentioned, though, again, in relation to all these things. That's then marriage, and then dealing with communities outside of ourselves. Because the first sign of a people going astray, we talk about marriage from one vantage point, right, is what? How and why they get married. And the traditions and the things that they do while they get married. This is where we need to go back to the original Sunnah, which is much more organic, much more simple, much more. Am I right or am I wrong? Have anyone here actually taken the time out to read the Surah and the Hadith books about marriage and the laws of marriage? No? Do it someday and find the difference. How simple it was. In a hadith of Sahih Muslim and others, there's a man, or actually a woman. Just think about all of this in our own context of how we view marriage in Muslim communities now. Think about all of it. A woman came to the Prophet ﷺ and offered herself in marriage. That's the first thing. Right now, that's like, when and where would you ever hear of something like that? Like, obviously people would be up, how? The Prophet ﷺ was not interested. So someone else came and said, well, if you're not interested, I may be interested. And he asked the man, do you have anything to give to her as a mahr? If she accepts, he said, let me see. He goes back to his house. He says, I don't have anything. Nothing? Not even like anything? Go back again. Comes back. Nothing. Except the clothes on my back. Just think about all these things for a second. I said, okay, how much Quran do you know? All right, so I said this and this. I was like, that's good. Okay, your mahr is that you teach her whatever Quran you know. How simple was it? How complicated was it? Not complicated at all. Very simple, very organic, very fluid, right? Literally, boy meets girl, girl meets boy in this case, and then what? As long as there's, now, of course, there's fiqh issues here. Not all the ulama agree that you can marry someone just simply teaching them the Quran. Okay, we're not going to get into that right now. Meaning you do have to pay something of a mahar. That's not the issue. The point I'm only trying to make here is that the simplicity of it all, right? How simple and organic it was. Not to mention that, there's so many hadith, and again, it's good to read the seerah. How simple was this for them from a fiqh point of view too? That's why, simply put, like if you look at marriage here in this society, which we are acclimated to this society, okay, marriage now implies a whole slew of what? Personal law. Then if you want to talk about divorce, oh my God, right? Lawyers, custody, taxes, everything else involved. In Islam, right, the simplest, most basic marriage is two people in front of witnesses saying what? Ijab and Qabul. You don't even technically need a mufti or an alim or an imam to come and read the khutbah. That's the sunnah. You understand the difference? It's a sunnah. It should be done. It's a good practice. And announcing the marriage in public and amongst people is a good practice, and it should be done. But it's not absolutely necessary. The bare minimum of a marriage would be two people, one boy, one girl, get in front of witnesses in the community and say what? We're now husband and wife. For what purpose? Just simply so people know they're not committing zina. That bare minimum. Okay, these people are now with each other. It's a lawful Islamic marriage, right? So how simple is it? Extremely simple. So why do get married? This is the point that we need to find out, right, from the Quran and the Sunnah. So then why do people get married? If there's not all these other complications involved in it, why do people get married? What is their purpose? And when they choose to get married, and all of that is included. When the ummah is following the Sunnah, it is a sign that their iman is very strong. When the ummah is deviating from that in their marriage practices because that's the beginning of society, then it's a sign that there needs to be some education in the community. And you need to come back to this organic simplicity of the Sunnah. Now when you do that, you remember already I said following the Sunnah is what we should be doing, not following the ways of other people. Because realistically, if you talk about all the things that people do during their marriages, is that from the Sunnah or is that from other people's tradition? Which one is it? It's other people's tradition, right? All of these little complicated things we put into it, is that from the Islamic tradition or is that from other people? Well, obviously it's from somebody else, okay? So, but if you go back to the Sunnah and you practice the Sunnah, what will be the result of that? In the beginning, you will find a lot of opposition, obviously. I can give so many examples of that. I remember this one, there's too many examples of how this there was one young brother in Chicago who finally convinced his parents to have a simple marriage. And they were ready to go to the imam without a big party, without a lot of expenses and money thrown into it. And when they got there, their cousins back in Palestine called up. Cousins in Palestine, like you're how many miles away? Called up, said, how dare you do this without telling us, and throwing a party and blah, blah, this, that, the other thing. So now the poor man who was just, you know how it is. If you just got out of college, you already have what? Debts, issues, problems. Now he has to have like a whatever, 100, who knows how much money party for his cousins in Palestine. Ya Rab, what is really? Like, I'm going to have to go another thousands of dollars in debt just to throw you a party where you're going to do what? Come and eat maqluba, whatever, that's a special Palestinian dish, or biryani, or whatever it may be, and play a couple songs and then go home? And I'm thousands of dollars in debt for this? SubhanAllah. Whereas Rasulullah said that the best marriage is that which has the least amount of expenditure. Least amount. As simple as it gets, is as simple. Even Ali, again, read these things, how he had to pawn some of his items just to get married. He had to take some of his personal items and pawn them off, sell them, just to get the money to get married to Fatima. Right? Such a simple man. Yes, different times, different society, no doubt. We're going to take all that into consideration. But at least take that example and at least take the things that are totally unnecessary out of the picture, right? But if you do that again, then you'll have your cousins calling up from whatever place and yelling at you and saying that how dare you, and what do you think you're doing? And I don't even want to get into the issue of, some of the shuyukh in the past, in the 19th century in India, were actually killed when they married off a widow. In some parts of India, it was because of the Hindu tradition, right? So when they married off a widow, they were actually killed for that. Right? Which is, again, is that part of the sunnah? Should you marry off divorcees and widows and so forth? Yes, they should have the right to live their life after that. But because they're so entrenched in this tradition, you literally had to lose their life just for that. And so it's a hard path, but it's a path worth trotting. Eventually, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless and put barakah in the people who decide to try to change these things slowly but surely. And you'll see that, a lot of the problems start there. People wonder why marriages go wrong. Sometimes we have to ask from the very beginning what was going on. What were the mentality behind the people that got married, and what was their whole, not that you can't change. I mean, there's times where people, mashallah, they get married because it was a little bit of harami going on before, a little bit of romantic involvement, and whatever reason they take that happens to us too. They take the couple to the sheikh and quickly marry them off because we're embarrassed. But then later on, Allah accepts them, they make tawbah, and they have a very good marriage. So I'm not saying there's no hope, right? But what I'm saying is that we are now parents, and we are now people where the future is coming. So we should think about ways to do what? Bring us back a little closer to that original organic structure of the sunnah and the understanding of these things. Make life a little easier for all of us, actually. It may be difficult in the beginning, especially in our society, because it's not really set up for that type of lifestyle. Right? Inshallah, we will be blessed and we'll have barakah if we make some, at least in intention, at least that much, right? And for our future generations, let's make it simpler, follow this pattern of the Prophet ﷺ. And that will be the beginning of, believe it or not, too, how, again, it's related, how you work as a community is exactly how you will work with people outside of the community.
Not even make it simple. It's amazing. Sometimes I think people find these hadiths and then do the exact opposite of it. Like I wasn't even aware of that hadith that the best marriage is. But if you look at some of these marriages, Pakistan is notorious for this. Where the bank is just completely broke over these marriages, and so much so that the government a few years had to outlaw some of these marriages. It's just...
Is that bad? Yeah. It happens all the time. And not just Pakistan, here too. How many marriages we have to do, and it's just like every time you go to one, there's very few where people really have mashallah, a very simple and impressive type of marriage. It's not a lot of this going on. Even the people who think they're like, or who look like, deendar, even them, you go there and it's a whole bunch of this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, okay, well, mashallah. There has to come a time though where people say, okay, well, we're going to have to be the ones who break that trend. It may not be comfortable at first. My issue is though, it's hard for me to feel that much sympathy for some people because your relatives are going to yell at you. Come on. How long have my people have been Christian and been, and I became Muslim? I rocked the boat pretty bad, didn't I? So you're going to get sympathy from me? No. Sorry. If it's about rocking the boat, then you're not going to get much sympathy from me. Okay, so your cousins from Palestine, like I gave an egg, are going to get mad. Oh, well. Really, at the end of the day, what does it do for you to get in debt just to throw someone a party? And even from that point of view, like I said, it's not even like a real party. So I can come and eat like biryani and dance to it. It's not even a real party. For what? It didn't really do anything. What is it? It's not worth it, right? You add it up. It's like what they call. There's actually a whole book about it. There's a book that's called Sin Without Pleasure. It's like you did the sin and you didn't get anything out of it even. It's like, if you at least got something out of it, right? No. It's like I didn't even get anything out of it and I still did it. That makes no sense. May Allah Ta'ala make it easy for us. You're right, though. It's like everything that we read, we do the exact opposite. Any questions before we leave, before we wrap it up? I know that's not related, but remember earlier you asked me about the Jawhar and the Adab and these things are the terms that we used. The Jawhar is actually that's why some Western scholars call the Islamic tradition an atomic worldview. The Jawhar would basically be if you strip down everything in the universe of its non-essential attributes, which is almost everything, right? You start stripping down everything and then it just becomes basically what? A pure atom. Or now they have, what is it, the quartz or whatever, right? They're coming out. When you say that something, what is the essence of it? All the non-essential things, the a'rad, you strip it down, then it just becomes basically what? An atom. And we just become a bunch of atoms put together, and those atoms then take on these attributes. That's the premise of it all. And the reason why we say the Jawhar also is not eternal, and it is created and it is in need, is because even that Jawhar, eventually it is two things. One, it does occupy some part in time and space. It's still distinguishable because even if it's an atom, it has a certain, you understand? Certain place wherewith it exists. It's what's called mutahayyiz. On top of that, it cannot be conceived of, nor can it exist, especially when you have a jism. Remember, he said jism is when you take two or more parts and put it together, which is what everything else is composed. So all these atoms come together and they become ajsam. Can you have a jism without a'rad? Can you? No. Not even an atom can exist outside of time and space. You get the point? So that's a proof that in and of itself, it is contingent, right? It doesn't exist independent of these things, which means that it had to be created. Get my point? Had to be. That's why they say, I don't want to get that, so that's another deep part. Allah is a being who is unlike any other being, meaning unlike these Jawhar and the A'rad. He exists in and of by himself without being dependent on a place or anything that specifies him or makes him into anything or comprises, right, one or two more parts, which is why his sifat, also his attributes, right, are not separate. They exist because of him. You get the difference? We'll go over it again. It's kind of in the beginning, right, like so it's very important to understand these points, because then later on, inshallah, when you start thinking more and more and more, as Abu Bakr al-Jassas, rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the exegetes of the Quran, says about Surah Al-Baqarah in terms of dhikr, this is part of dhikr too. To think about the world around you and the essence of it, and to come to conclusions about Allah and His power and His being is dhikr. You understand? It is dhikr, and it's the highest form of dhikr. Because when you realize that everything is created in Allah is Rabbul Alameen, inshallah, may Allah make it easy. Is that it? Jazakallah khair for coming.